My name's Graham Dyer, and I'm the Senior Research Curator in the Royal Mint Museum. The Battle of Waterloo, I suppose, is one of the most important and most significant of modern battles. It was a decisive victory. It brought to an end the career of Napoleon and, as we now know, ushered in a period of peace in Europe that was to last 100 years. The Duke of Wellington, by his victory at Waterloo, cemented his position as one of our great generals. He was very much admired at the time. I mean, it was something that then stayed with him until his death. It gave him an enormous stature. You know, fighting someone who had fought and won so many battles over the previous 20 years, it was quite an achievement. And as we know, it was the first time that Wellington and Napoleon had fought each other. The Battle of Waterloo had its impact on the Royal Mint. We started something that was then to continue until the present day of rewarding those who take part in military activities with medals. And strangely, that hadn't happened to the same extent before. And it then sets a pattern for what's happened ever since. The suggestion that there should be a medal for Waterloo seems to have come from the Duke of Wellington himself, which is in some ways a little strange because on other occasions he'd shown himself not to be a great fan of issuing medals, but perhaps even for him he saw Waterloo as something that was above and beyond, and that the people who fought there deserved recognition, as indeed they did. His elder brother, William Wellesley Pole, was Master of the Mint and therefore perfectly placed to carry out his wishes. There are in fact two medals for Waterloo. One is the campaign medal that was awarded to everyone who was present at the battle. The second one was a much grander affair, a much larger affair, intended to be made in gold for the Prince Regent, the Tsar of Russia, the Emperor of Austria and the King of Prussia. And to be awarded to them, to their generals and their ministers. One of the great things about Wellesley Pole is that he cared about good design. It went to someone employed by the Royal Mint, Benedetto Pistrucci. Pistrucci is a very interesting character. He's an Italian. He came over to England just after the Battle of Waterloo, showed himself to be an astonishing engraver and designer, and Wellesley Pole recruited him for the Royal Mint. He produced the George and the Dragon, which still appears on the gold sovereign. So he was off to a flying start. It's no surprise really that the job of designing this great Waterloo medal found its way into his studio. Pistrucci's position in the Mint was a little awkward because he was a foreigner, he was an Italian, and as a foreigner he couldn't be appointed to the post of chief engraver, and that meant that his position within the Royal Mint was never entirely secure. In 1828, a compromise was offered whereby he became chief medalist and was given a regular salary, very much with the idea of the Waterloo Medal in mind, though not just the Waterloo Medal. Pistrucci was certainly involved from quite early on, but his designs were not approved by the Prince Regent until 1819. It was Pistrucci's job then to convert those models into steel dies. For his work on the Waterloo Medal, Pistrucci was offered a remarkable fee of £3,500. And although it's difficult to convert that into modern money, that's probably equivalent to something like £250,000. And if you look at that from the Royal Mint's point of view, the Royal Mint had invested £250,000 in Pistrucci and his design. So no wonder the Royal Mint was keen to get the work done and the medal struck. But remarkably, those dies were not finished and delivered by Pistrucci until 1849. And when you look at the medal itself, at its intricate designs, you can see that it would have required a huge investment of Pistrucci's time, but not 25 years or more. because what he feared was that when that work was completed, the Mint would sever its contact with him and there would be no further work. And the reason for that is, although he was a man of immense talent, in many ways an engraving genius, you've only got to look at the medal to see that this is the work of a genius. He was a very difficult person. He had the temperament that went with it. And yes, although we would be sad to lose a man of such talent, it was not possible to work with him in a sensible way. We never got to the stage of final dies. What Pistrucci delivered in 1849 are what we would call the matrices, the master dies, from which we would then have made punches. From the punches we would have made dies, and it would have been possible to put the lettering on each die, and no doubt that was what was intended. He himself said that, looking at the medal, it was equivalent to 30 normal medals. And he wanted people to understand that was one of the reasons it was taking so long, because it did represent this great burden of work. But there was an additional technical problem. Because the medal is so large, it's over 5 inches in diameter, there was a risk that when you hardened the steel dies, those dies might break. It was too big a responsibility to take, and we never, in fact, got round to hardening them. Therefore, no medals could ever be struck from them. And the best we could ever do was to take soft impressions from which we could grow copper electrotypes that give the appearance of a medal, but are not a struck medal. By the time he delivered the dies, only Wellington was still alive of those great people who had been involved in the battle. When Gladstone was Master of the Mint in the 1840s, he had dealings directly with Pistrucci over the medal and bent over backwards to try to encourage Pistrucci to finish it and describe Pistrucci as a genius.